All right, so welcome to everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. The Propels workshop series is a very important thing to SBME, so all participation is wonderful. And at the end of this, I will send you a survey to get your feedback on this session. So today I want to start by first introducing you to the session, which is applying to medical school as a biomedical engineer. And also, we need to obviously acknowledge the land upon which we learn and which we work with one another. So UBC School of Biomedical Engineering, both our current site and the new building is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam people. It's very important, obviously, to remember that we are guests in this land, where generations of those who call this place home have passed down the stories and cultures for thousands of years before us. I highly encourage everyone to take the time to go to the appropriate resources and learn why land acknowledgements matter. It is at the very smallest thing that we can do. All right, so without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. Now, Dr. Shahin Shirzad is still having some technical difficulties connecting right now, so we will be beginning with Rohit Singla. So I'll start by saying that Rohit is currently an MD PhD candidate at SBME since 2018. He has a Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering and a Master's in Biomedical Engineering, both from UBC. He is the co-founder of 92 Medical, which is an ultrasound navigation guidance for epidural and facet joint injections, and as well, ScriptSides, a productivity desktop application for the independent film industry. And Dr. Shahin Shirzad, he is the Assistant Dean of Admissions in the MD program at UBC since 2017. He oversees the admissions process from recruitment and application to candidate selection and site placement. Dr. Shazad is also an emergency physician and a hyperbaric physician at Vancouver General Hospital. He's a clinical instructor with the Department of Emergency Medicine. And he received his MD and residency training at UBC, his master's in public health at Harvard University. So welcome to the both of you, and hopefully to Shazad when he arrives. And Rohit, please take it away.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. I'm gonna share my screen and kind of go from there. So welcome everyone. I'm kind of delighted to see that there's over one person interested in this, because hopefully you can see, at least by the numbers, that there's more people in engineering that want to consider med school than just you, right? And let me acknowledge that first off. I'm going to only have 3 slides, maybe 4. We're just going to talk about my pre-med path and how I ended up being a medical doctor after doing far too much engineering. I'm not going to talk about the MD PhD program, but I can answer any questions about that offline, for example. And then I'm going to point you towards some resources or kind of next steps as to where you should go or want to go if you're interested in that path. If you want to reach out to me directly, whoops, I don't know what happened there. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can find me on Twitter at researchingrow, or email me at sbme_talk at that email. So let's get started. This is my life, a decade of my life in a nutshell. When I started started undergrad, just graduating high school, I quite frankly would have told you I never want to be a doctor. I don't like biology. I don't want to do medicine. And as I put it, I ruined my mom's dream of me ever being a doctor. And in fact, I did literally everything else I possibly could have. So throughout the course of my undergrad, about 5 years, much like many of you, I coached football throughout 5 years. I joined UBC Orbit and made nanosatellites. I kind of did some tech and med club stuff, but that really was just me playing around with cool toys for a couple of evenings. And then my kind of claim to fame is that I hosted a radio show throughout my undergrad all about science. And so, even early on, we can kind of see that within that first 5 years, I was not, and I'm still not, your traditional pre-med student. Medicine wasn't really even on my radar in these first 5 years. It might not be on your radar now, or maybe just came to mind recently. And so I want to emphasize that unlike what you may think, all students can consider medicine at any point in time. I started my master's at some point around 2015, 2016, and that's kind of when I thought I should apply to medicine. I decided to write my MCAT during that summer 2016 in a very rushed manner, just so I could apply and get a kick at the can and see how I would do. And then lo and behold, a year later, I actually was rejected. I graduated my master's, and like I'm sure many of you who are graduating this year, I had my own existential crisis of what am I doing and where do I want to go? I had that thought of, do I actually want to do medicine? Do I actually want to be an engineer? Or do I want to switch entirely and just kind of pivot to something else? Regardless, I applied again to medicine, kind of filled my time in that year gap, exploring some startups, exploring some research. And luckily, I was accepted to med school in 2018. However, not without some roller coaster of emotions, where I got in 2 weeks just before med school started. That is August of 2018, where I received a phone call from Dr. Shazad himself, offering me a spot into UBC Medicine. And so hopefully, as you look through this graph and notice that it's my mood on the y-axis, you'll notice the peaks and valleys, and of course, the dipping of the mood. And of course, actually getting in and having a spot there was quite exciting. And so, I am thankful to Dr. Shazad for that phone call in 2018 and allowing me to make my pre-med path as diverse and as convoluted as it was into one that is suitable for medicine. But I'm not the only person with this kind of alternative path to medicine. I wanted to put up 3 individuals who are my colleagues. I'm not going to name them here, obviously, for reasons there. But I wanted to highlight their journeys, right? And so, we have the daring dog who did an Asian studies undergrad, spent a few years in Japan, is a baker, a musician, a reader, tour officer at Parliament for a bit, did a few courses in bio and psych, but really took a risk and quit their job after 8 years just to try for medicine. And they didn't feel like they were good at science. So like many of us who maybe look at biology or other aspects of what we perceive medicine to be, maybe we weren't that confident in it. Well, take it from a guy that pretty much only did 1 undergrad course in biology, Bio 110, you can still do it. It takes a little bit of hard work, but there is a path for you there. We can also talk about Courageous Cat, who faced a fair amount of adversity in their life and was kind of derailed from their initial plans, but did some volunteer work in care homes, really loved working with geriatric individuals, had a specific passion around dementia, and that really drove their theme of what they wanted to do and what they were interested in doing, and eventually made their way a few years later after their undergrad into medicine. And so their takeaway there was that with age comes life experience and empathy, and so a better understanding of the world around them, which, as I'm sure we all hope, we see in our clinicians, and so forth. Then we have our Peppy Penguin, and they're one of my favorite ones because they did like a year of business and then quit that and then traveled to 15 different countries, came back, did a social science anthropology degree, hated it, worked at a law firm for a bit, volunteered with Island Sexual Health for a second, and they just were trying to figure themselves out. They didn't really know what they wanted to be when they grew up, but once they found their way into medicine, they were quite confident that that's where they're going to be. And I'm happy to say that all these individuals are actually now amongst the top of their class. They're excitingly going towards a match in the fall, trying to specialize and continue on in medicine. And I'm excited to have these individuals in my class because they're also unique, diverse, and driven, but they're also fun individuals and interesting individuals to be around with. And so if that doesn't highlight it, let me just put it into simple words here, is that all paths can lead to medicine. And hopefully Dr. Shazad will comment on that and emphasize that point. But no matter what route you're taking, whether that be trying to leave an undergrad early, whether that be working for a few years after your engineering undergrad, or whether that be being in a well-off position and wanting to take a risk, all paths can kind of lead to medicine. There is no one direct path that you don't have to fit that pre-med stereotype. and it is possible to go there and get into medicine if that's, if it's meant for you and if that's what you want to do. And so I wanted to end on this note. I recently put out an article with advice to a scientist. Some of you may be familiar with Dr. Nika Shakiba, who has co-founded this webpage as a point of resource information, what have you, opinion for students like yourself. And so I kind of broke down a little bit of what a typical application cycle might look like for anyone applying to a Canadian medical school. Check it out. It's pretty useful. It's a little bit long, but it's a good starting point for you guys trying to figure out your own journey. And I will leave it there. That is actually all I had to say.
Thanks very much, Rohit. So yeah, we'll have questions at the end for both of our presenters. And so now I would very much like to welcome Dr. Shahin Shirzad to present and share screen and all that kind of good stuff. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Shazad.
Great, thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. Sorry for the delay. It seems whenever you have a presentation, your computer decides to completely reboot and update everything. I sort of needed a room full of engineers to help me out, but I'm glad I was able to finally sort it out, so my apologies. So thank you so much for the invite. Really, really appreciate it. Rohit, thank you for being so involved in bringing this together. Many of you I haven't met, and thank you for the introduction, but my name is Shahin Shirzad. I'm the Assistant Dean responsible for admission to the MD undergraduate program. I'm also a graduate of UBC Medicine and did my Royal College training here as well, and presently work clinically in Vancouver in addition to taking on this role around admissions. Hopefully I can share my screen. So I've been asked to speak a little bit just around the admissions process and a little bit about my story of the process in which I discovered sort of medicine as a career path. Hopefully many of you are thinking about the possibility of a career in medicine. I can tell you that it's an incredibly exciting path. It's very vast, and I think this picture in some ways encapsulates it. You know, there's so many different aspects that one can be involved in with regards to the study and practice of medicine. You can have a very clinically based, patient-intensive based practice, you know, where you're a psychiatrist or you're an internal medicine doctor, where you're interacting with patients every day. You can have a very procedural based practice where you do surgery, anywhere from general surgery to thoracic surgery to pediatric surgery to neurosurgery. And then you can also have a practice that has really nothing to do with direct bedside patient care. And that could be pathology, that could be public health. And what's I think really exciting also about the practice of medicine is that there is the possibility to evolve and change. And so many people will start out in a certain area of medicine, and with time they will expand and sort of find different niche areas. They will also discover areas that they really enjoy that they never maybe initially realized in medical school or residency, and they'll be able to do some extra training and sort of move into those areas as well. And so it's an incredibly diverse field. I know when I was thinking about the possibility of medicine, I never thought that I was the right candidate. I came from an immigrant family. I wasn't born in Canada. We moved here when I was relatively young. I had no direct physicians in the family, and not a lot of healthcare providers in the family, and not a lot of mentors. And so I kind of always heard these rumors from different individuals that, you know, you probably need someone in healthcare and medicine if you have a chance to get in. You need to go and travel to third world countries and volunteer and work on medical missions and do all this stuff and sort of plan years ahead of time if you ever have a hope to get into medicine. But fortunately, I kind of put a lot of that kind of dialogue aside and decided that I wanted to move forward with a career in medicine, and applied and was fortunate enough to get in. And what I discovered when I entered medicine was that, you know, the diversity of the class was very different than what I imagined. And a lot of that information was incorrect. And there was people who were at all different stages of their life, had all different backgrounds in my medical class. And I think that's what actually made studying medicine so exciting, was the fact that you were in with such a capable group and such a diverse group with such different experiences. We had anywhere from individuals who were professional performers with Cirque du Soleil, to Olympic athletes, to researchers, to parents that had taken years off school and decided to come back and pursue medicine. And so it really is a diverse field, but it also requires a diversity in individuals being involved. And I think probably one of the best decisions I ever made was to pursue, my wife would say the best decision I ever made was to decide to marry her and for us to get married. But the second best decision was to pursue a career in medicine. And I think, really speaking to many of my colleagues, we all feel tremendously blessed to be in a career where you're able to really influence people's lives in a positive way and really be involved in some of the most intimate moments, and to kind of help people along that path of health. But with medicine also does come challenges, and sometimes you do feel, as you're applying to medical school and going through your medical school training, that you're kind of walking this tightrope where you're trying to balance all the demands of medical school with your personal demands, your family demands. And I think many of you have probably already experienced this being in an engineering program. And you know, it is a long road. Typically, you need a 3 to 4 year degree, or 3 to 4 years of undergraduate coursework before you can apply. Most people have an undergraduate degree before they enter medical school. It's a 4-year program. And then following that, it's going to be 2 years of minimum 2 years of residency. And it could be anywhere from 2 years to 5 years of residency, depending on what program you choose. Fortunately, during residency, you do start to get paid. You're actually working. You do have some educational time and educational half days, but a lot of it is at the bedside, actually working clinically and learning clinically. And so there will be times that, you know, you're going to miss birthdays, and you're going to miss important events for your family because you're going to be on call. You're going to be tired. You're going to be up in the middle of the night when everyone else is asleep, or your friends are out enjoying sort of life. And so you will have to make those moments of sacrifice. But I think if you are interested in medicine, the path is so interesting and so exciting and so engaging that it's actually surprising how quickly some of this training goes by, and before you know it, you're done. So my story, once I entered medical school, I actually didn't really know what specialty I wanted to do. And so every single rotation I was on, I thought that's my calling. You know, I went on pediatrics, and I thought, oh, wow, this is amazing. I'm going to be a pediatrician. Then I went into internal medicine, and I thought, wow, this is so cognitively stimulating. Then I would have my surgical rotation, and I'd think these procedures are incredible, and you really do sort of affect people's lives and outcomes. And then I fell into emergency medicine, where it really was this incredible combination of so many different subspecialties, where I work with elderly, I work with psychiatric patients, I work with pediatric patients, I work with medically sick patients, I work with surgical patients, I do lots of procedures, resuscitations, dealing with trauma. And so that's where I sort of discovered my calling in many ways, and was fortunate to be admitted to the Royal College program at UBC, and sort of underwent 5 years of training in emergency and trauma. About 2 or 3 years into my training, I thought, you know what, I want to get out there and experience what it actually means to be a doctor. And so I had my general practice, and I moved to Nunavut. And so I moved to the town of Iqaluit, which is the capital. And I began working there as a GP. And everything I thought I would do when I entered medical school actually kind of happened when I arrived. And this is the main referral hospital in Qaluit. And so you see kind of the newer building, which is the new section of the hospital that has our acute care beds, our surgical suites. You could admit up to, I think it was about 20 patients at the time. We admitted both pediatric, seniors, all ages. We had one general surgeon in the community, one GP and anesthetist. We did our own deliveries, and we also serviced many of the hamlets which have no road access. It's all fly-in access. And the older building there is what the old hospital was, and that's our ambulatory building where we would run a lot of our clinics. So all the patients from basically the Eastern Arctic area and the Baffin Island area would be brought into here as the main referral center. Once a month, I would be flown into one of the nursing stations in one of the outlying communities, and this is a typical one. There was no physicians in these communities. They were all run by healthcare nurses and primary care nurses and public health nurses. And so all the complicated patients that they kind of struggled with to figure out what to do, they would kind of line them up in a 2 or 3 days worth of clinic, and a physician would come in and sort of see those patients at the time. This is me in one of those communities. That's the paramedic. We flew in together. There was a trauma, and so this gentleman actually was out hunting, and he flipped his snow machine. And he sustained a few injuries. He had a collapsed lung, and so that's us putting in a chest tube to try to fly him out. And I remember when I arrived at the nursing station, he was in the main sort of trauma area, the assessment area, and there was children everywhere running in and out and kind of coming all sorts of places. And I remember asking the nurse, like, who do all these children belong to? And they said that it was the patients. And so he had 11 children, and he was actually out hunting to feed the family. And once he was injured, the whole family actually showed up at the healthcare center. And so we kind of stabilized him and then flew him down to Qaluit. And then eventually, I think he made his way onto Ottawa, which was our main referral center. This is one day I was running clinic, and kind of halfway through the clinic in one of these communities, patients just stopped coming. And I thought it was a bit odd because many of them had been waiting several weeks to see a physician. I went out there and I asked one of the nurses, and they said, well, the beluga whales have just arrived in the bay. So everyone has gone to meet the hunters and to kind of get their ration of mukta, or the fat and dermis of the beluga whale, and the meat for their sled dogs. And so I thought, well, there's no need for me to stick around. So we jumped on the ATVs for the clinic and went out to the ice edge and kind of caught the very end of the harvest. And so very different experience. I think from my context of being in the South, I thought, well, people are very interested in getting care. They don't have physicians in the community. They've been waiting a long time for these clinics, but culturally for them, it was much more important the fact that there was a harvest of beluga whales in the bay. And so we didn't see patients for about 2 hours after that. And then slowly they started to sort of trickle back in. So after I left Nunavut, I came back and I finished my residency. And during my residency, I did a fellowship in the US in hyperbaric medicine. And this is the hyperbaric chamber at Vancouver General Hospital. And so I work part-time emergency medicine, and then I work part-time hyperbaric medicine at VGH. And we treat anywhere from gas embolus, post-cardiac surgery, to necrotizing fasciitis, or those flesh-eating infections, to limb salvaging for bad diabetic wounds, to carbon monoxide poisoning, to divers with the bends, and we also do elective slate. And so this is, again, speaking to sort of some of the diversity in medicine. And so once I began working clinically, I worked in these two areas, and then I actually fell into the area of medical school education and was the clerkship director for year 3 and 4 students. And after I did that for a few years, I kind of fell into admissions, and now I also do admissions kind of part-time. And so why did I take the time to tell you all of this? I think it's to emphasize what Rohit spoke about, is the fact that there is an incredible diversity in medicine, and there's a need for an incredibly diverse individuals from all sorts of backgrounds. And I think particularly you guys in your engineering, your program, I think can be very much qualified and well prepared to enter a career in the field of medicine. And I think it can give you an incredible background and context for research, for all sorts of things that you can kind of do to expand your career in medicine. And in some ways, it doesn't also kind of tether you to an engineering background. You can move forward and kind of expand all sorts of different areas. And so I want to really emphasize the fact that there is definitely a place for you and your background and your education in medicine. So let's talk about our program. We have a distributed medical education program, and we are the first distributed educational program in North America, and I think probably one of the biggest now in North America. So we admit 288 students across 4 sites. The vast majority are admitted to our Vancouver Fraser medical program, but we do admit 32 individuals to, and our Vancouver Fraser medical program is sort of the hub, is the Point Grey campus at UBC. And then moving forward to sort of the clinical hospitals in the Lower Mainland. The IMP program is based at the University of Victoria, the SMP program at the Southern Medical Program, and the NMP, or sorry, the SMP program is the Southern Medical Program at the UBC Okanagan campus, and then the NMP program is in the Prince George campus. There's 32 spots at each of the distributed sites, and then the remainder of the spots are the VFMP, giving us a total of 288 students a year. So this is an incredible expansion in the number we admit. Historically, we used to admit about 120 students a year. And so recognizing that we have likely a shortage of physicians, there will be a lot of baby boomers that are retiring. The government has really pushed to expand our medical class. We have the vast majority of our students are admitted through the general pathway, but we also have some specific pathways, and one is our Northern and Rural pathway. And this is reserved for individuals who are truly interested in Northern and Rural medicine, being educated in a Northern and Rural setting. All 32 of our seats in our Northern Medical Program have to be admitted via this pathway. We have up to 10 seats in our Southern Medical Program and up to 2 seats in our Island Medical Program. And so for individuals, for any of you who have connections, have interests in living in Northern and Rural communities, I really encourage you to think about applying via this pathway. And so in addition to the general application, you will also put together a Northern and Rural training section application. And so this will ask you such as where you've lived since you were young, role of any, sorry, not mentioned, but mentors, ties to any rural areas, any relevant activities you may have. And then based on that, we sort of get an assessment of your connectedness and interest in Northern and Rural medicine. And so definitely spend the time to fill this out appropriately, speak about all the activities that you're involved in. It doesn't mean you have to have been born in a Northern and Rural area. Even if you happen to have been born in a more urban area, but you've spent a lot of your extracurricular time in Northern and Rural communities, because that's kind of where you're drawn to, and you just happen to be going to school in an urban area, really take the time to kind of mention all of that stuff in your application. We also have an Indigenous pathway, and this is really for self-identified Canadian Indigenous. In addition to the general application, you also submit an essay really speaking about sort of your indigeneity and connection to community. You also need to provide proof of Indigenous status, and there also is an Indigenous panel interview. For anyone who is interested, James Andrew, in addition to Megan, are our Indigenous Initiative Manager and Coordinator. And so feel free to contact them. That's their general email. And they can also sort of help you in regards to this particular pathway. Lastly, we have our MD PhD pathway, and that's really for our clinician scientists. There may be many of you who might be interested in the program, just like Rohit was. And so this is a combined program of our MD program, which is 4 years plus a PhD, so a 7-year program. It's a fairly intense program, and in addition to the general application, you also put in an application kind of looking a little bit around your interests around research and your experience around research. And then there also is an MD PhD panel interview as well. And then if you are interested at all in this program, feel free to contact the email below, and the program coordinator can kind of help you along. I think the program coordinator has just changed, so we have a new program coordinator, and so, but either way, that email will work. So in regards to timelines and how things work in regards to our application is an online application. It opens in typically mid-June in a kind of normal year. COVID was a bit different. And then you have a few months and it will close at around mid-September. So if you are interested, I really encourage you to look at the application early, start filling it out early. I know everyone always has these great plans and then everything gets left last minute, but the time you spend in your application is important in regards to what we can evaluate. So if you're having to rush through it and you're forgetting lots of activities you've been involved in and different aspects to your Northern Rural application, then unfortunately we just won't be able to evaluate you on those aspects because you wouldn't have included it in your application. And so spend the time. It is a fairly involved application, so that hopefully you have it well filled out and able to submit it by September 15th. We do have an early deadline as well, and so you can sort of check those dates on our website. After that, after September 15th, we go into the file evaluation process, which is what we're doing right now. Last year and this year, we've had probably close to 3,000 applications for our 288 spots. And so we spend a huge amount of human resources looking through every file and then shortlisting our top 700 applicants for interview. Once you've been selected for interview, that's actually a real accomplishment and sort of probably the biggest barrier in regards to numbers and getting admitted, because you go from a pool of 3,000 to 700. And then you'd be invited for our MMI interview, which I'll speak to, which is our multiple mini interview. After your interviews, we will ask for some reference letters. If you have applied via any of these other pathways, you may have a panel interview as well. And then final selection happens, which is committee-based. And you are hopefully made admissible at the time. And then an offer of admissions will come. Because we have 4 different sites, we try to put on lots of information sessions so everyone's aware of what's available to them, what the different sites are like, you know, opportunities to speak to the students, to hear from the students about the different sites. Because once you put in your rank list of where you want to go and be educated, we always try to give you your first option. But the letter that comes from my office, hopefully at time of admission, is a site-specific letter. And so you are bound, if you accept it, to attend that site. There isn't a lot of flexibility for transfer. But if you happen to not get your first choice, we will still put you on the wait list until the start of classes, and oftentimes things open up and you're able to move into your second or first choice. Once you accept, we ask for a $1,000 deposit. And if you're not interested, then we ask you to decline. You can only hold one position, one medical position in Canada. And so you can't kind of hold 5 spots across 5 different schools in Canada. We do ask you to sort of make your choice. And so, for example, if you got admitted to University of Toronto first, and so you held the spot there, but then you found out that you got admitted at UBC and you wanted to go to UBC, then you would have to decline your spot at U of T and accept your spot at UBC. So requirements. In regards to academic requirements, I think all of you guys will be well qualified. We ask that you have a minimum of 90 university transferable credits at time of entrance into medical school. So that actually means that at the end of your second year, you could actually start applying for medical school, because we allow you to complete those final 30 credits as long as you're taking full-time credits. So if you took 30 credits your first year, 30 credits your second year, you applied to medical school, and 30 credits during your application year, and you were admitted, then you would have completed 90 credits by the time you start class. So there is a handful of people who will be admitted after only completing 3 years of university transferable coursework, but the vast majority usually do have a degree, or some even have a master's degree, some have a PhD. Once you apply, if you have the typical 4-year credits, so let's say 120 credits, we actually will calculate an adjusted GPA for you. So everyone gets an overall GPA, which is all their coursework that they've ever done that's university transferable. Then if you've done more than 90 credits, we will allow you to drop your worst year of grades up to 30 credits, and that will become your adjusted GPA, as long as you have a remaining 90 credits left over. So that means that if you had 120 credits for a 4-year degree, you could drop your worst year grade-wise up to 30 credits. The only prerequisites to medical school now are English. So you need 2 English courses, and they need to be specific literature-based or writing-based English courses. We have a whole list of them, and so feel free to contact our office if you have any questions. But for example, English for business doesn't count, and so just make sure that you've taken the appropriate English prerequisite courses, and those can be taken during the year in which you're applying as well. We do ask that you do take the medical college admissions test, and so that is an exam that's about 7 or 8 hours long that kind of looks at all different sort of areas, but some of the basic sciences as well. And then if you're interested in MD PhD, you're going to put in that application. The Northern Rural, you're going to put in that application, and the Indigenous, you're going to put in the essay. We also ask for non-academic activities. So we recognize that you just don't need to be smart to get into medical school, that you kind of need to get a little bit of experience in, communicating with people, problem solving, leadership, all sorts of things, which will serve you well in medicine. And so the non-academic portion of the application is very important. I really want to emphasize that. This is the time where you're really going to spend the time to try to fill out your application well. And so this is on everything you've been involved in. And so that is anywhere from traditional stuff such as research, publications, volunteering, but also lots of non-traditional stuff. We recognize that your ability to be involved in activities is often related to your socioeconomic status, if you were brought up in a rural area versus an urban area, if you're a family of 5 kids versus 1 child. And so everything that you, and so the spectrum is wide in regards to things that you can include. So things, non-traditional things that I would encourage you to include are, for example, let's say you're a parent and you have children. Let's say you've had to deal with family health issues and you've been a care provider to family members. If you've had to work on a family farm, if you've had to work during your undergrad degree, if you've had to take care of a sibling with autism or a disability. And so this really allows individuals of all different backgrounds, of all different experiences, to really contribute to the non-academic portion of their application. The other thing we ask for is a proof of residency. So the vast majority of our students are BC residents, and so you do need an active medical services plan card. And so we will admit only up to 10% of our class from out of province. The minimum GPA to apply is a 75% average if you're in province. It's an 85% average if you're out of province. So it's quite a bit more competitive if you're an out of province applicant. So backgrounds. all of you are from an engineering background at this point. These are a few stats. Historically, we haven't gotten a large number of applicants from an engineering background, but we're getting greater and greater numbers. This is what we admitted over the last few years. So you can see in 2021, we admitted 9 individuals, some with a master's, some with a bachelor's. Since the prerequisites particularly have been removed, so historically you had to take like organic chemistry and biochemistry and so on, we are seeing a more diverse pool. And so we will see people with engineering backgrounds, we will see people with fine arts degrees, with literature degrees, with music degrees. Still, probably the vast majority of the students that apply have a bachelor's of science, but this really just speaks to the fact that everyone is welcome to apply and everyone really has a place and an area to contribute with regards to medical education at UBC. So in regards to the MCAT, you do need a minimum score. There's multiple sections. There's 4 sections. 2 are basic science sections. One's sort of a reasoning section, and one is sort of a sociology, psychology section. And so we ask for a minimum of a 124 in each section. It doesn't really mean a lot to you, the 124, unless you're kind of interested in the MCAT and you've been looking into it, but just be aware that that's kind of the minimum ask. And so as long as you get that minimum score, then you'll get a full application review. And of course, you try to score as high as possible, and that will serve you well in the application process. You want to try to book your MCAT test as early as possible, because you need to make sure that you submit your application, your scores within before the deadline for the scores to arrive. And so you will have to kind of look at a little bit of that online, see when the various seatings are for the exam, and they'll let you know when the scores will be published and shared with the schools, and make sure that that happens before the deadline that we ask. And then the MCAT, it's an important aspect, but it's not the only aspect. And so I would say, spend the time to try to prepare for it, but just realize that there's all different aspects of your application that we're going to look at. We're going to look at your non-academics, we're going to look at your grades, we're going to look at your reference letters, and so the MCAT is just sort of one of those aspects. For the pre-interview evaluation, so this is kind of the most important areas to be able to move yourself forward for interview. Is 50% is going to be your academics, so your overall, your adjusted GPA, and 50% is going to be your non-academics. Those are the only 2 things we look at, aside from ensuring that you have a minimum of a 124 in all sections of your MCAT. And if that happens, then we take our top candidates and we bring them to interview. So again, emphasizing the fact that your non-academic portion of your application is actually quite important in addition to your grades. Once you're invited to interview, our interviews are multiple mini interviews. They're typically about 10 stations. You have about a 2-minute time to read a scenario, then you have a 7 to 8 minutes interview, and then you kind of move through to the next station. And so we kind of take multiple small samplings and then average them out, and then that's your overall interview score. The beauty of that is if you have one bad station, it doesn't sink the boat. And it's really the average of it that's helpful. And this is now a type of interview process that most medical schools and professional schools use in some capacity. I would really encourage you to kind of be familiar with it before you kind of come into the interviews. When it's all over, we look at your academic, your record, your non-academic, extenuating circumstances. And so if there are things in your application, such as you had to take time off school, or you had a period of time where your grades were really bad or not as good, then you have an opportunity to actually write that into your application. And so definitely take that opportunity to write any of those extenuating circumstances. We'll look at your MCAT scores, your interview scores, and then also your references. And then the ranking will then decide who gets admitted to what program. And hopefully you will then get an admissions letter from my office sometime after you've done your interviews. And so usually final selection happens in kind of March, April, and then May, June is usually when the actual letters go out. And then the start of classes is usually the first week of August.
Yeah.
Or
if you're lucky like me, you'll receive a phone call from Dr. Shazad a few weeks before the classes start, and you have that fun joy. Dr. Shirzad, would you mind if we moved into questions and answered a few while you're
here?
Yeah,
absolutely. I'll leave that stuff up there. If there's any questions, go to our program website or admissions blog. We also have virtual sessions, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Just to emphasize time, students feel free to reach out to me directly. I can drop my email in the chat. I can answer some of your more specific questions. But for Dr. Shazad, could you comment on the value of a master's degree in applications?
Yeah, certainly. So any coursework that you do during your master's degree will contribute towards your overall and your adjusted GPA. And so we definitely look at that coursework as well. Master's degrees can definitely be helpful if you're also interested in certain programs like the MD PhD program, and that gives you some research experience. And what I would really encourage is that hopefully you're also pursuing a degree that you're interested in, not just that you think it's going to help you get into medical school. And we do require that you complete your master's degree. So if you get admitted to medical school, you have to complete your master's degree by the end of July before classes start, and classes start early August.
Wonderful. And then another related question to that. Some other programs offer an MD, MBA joint degree or an MD plus degree. Can you comment on that for UBC?
Yeah, so we have no formal program at the start of medical school aside from our MD PhD program. There is an sort of a public health school as well at UBC. And so I know some students have looked at how they could pursue a public health degree, but really the most formalized integrated program is our MD PhD program. And so many people would just sort of do other degrees, either during their residency or kind of would need to speak to the program once they're in the program.
Wonderful. And then, students are concerned about, say, maintaining a competitive GPA in engineering. Even the best students may have an 88 and they may be at the top of the class as an average. How do we balance that out? Is that factored into admissions, or how do we maintain that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think there is a recognition that certain programs are probably academically a bit more challenging, engineering being one of them. There definitely is a holistic review if you come to final selection and committee review. And so there is a look at the type of degree you do. There's a look at the trend of your grades. And so we recognize that many people may start out with a bit of a rough transition to university, but we hope that as you move forward, that you've kind of progressed and improved in regards to your grades. And if there are factors that have influenced your ability to do well in school for a year or 2 years, then definitely include that in the extenuating circumstances section. There's really not a huge downside to that. And then also any individuals who happen to have a documented and diagnosed, for example, learning disability or need accommodation and weren't accommodated, there is this Center of Accessibility at UBC that you can apply to during the application process. And we will accommodate people with, for example, speech impediments during the interview process and give them sort of accommodation, or individuals who have had certain difficulties around academics because of learning issues. And so that would all be through the Center of Accessibility, and it's on our website.
Wonderful, thank you. And then perhaps 2 more questions I just want to ask briefly. Do things time out for your med school application? For example, if you're an athlete, but you stopped at the start of university?
Sorry, say that one more time.
Do things say quote unquote time out? How far back could you go with your application for activity?
Oh, I see. Yeah, so in general, the more you've been involved with an activity, the more value we give it. So if you did something for a weekend, it's probably going to be different than you've committed to a group for 2 or 3 years. Also, the more recent the activity is also probably going to be of more value, but that's within reason, right? And so that's probably more applicable to individual who later in life is applying to medical school. So they're already in their 30s and have done lots of activities. And so within the last 10 years would probably be the most applicable for their application. But there really is no downside to including extra information. We don't need to be going down into like elementary school awards and junior high awards, but if you've done significant stuff in your senior years of high school, we're happy for you to include that.
And then related to that, how does co-op experience or a co-op work term valued?
Yeah, so we definitely love to see work experience. We love to see reference letters from work experience. And so include all that information. There are sections in the application that you can include work experience. And so definitely co-op is something that we want to see in your application as well.
Wonderful.
A quick one here that I want to bring up. It's a really great question from Anjali. It's effectively asking, how is this program's admittance sort of protocol, or how are they being changed due to COVID-19? COVID-19 would make it difficult to find volunteer experience, in a hospital and that sort of thing over these past 20 months. So is that being factored in to the application process?
Yeah, no, really good question. So a few ways is, one, our MMI interviews are virtual. At least they were virtual last year. They will be virtual this year as well. Historically, they were always in person. And we recognize that because, and this is probably the first application cycle that individuals just submitted applications for, where there's been a significant influence around the pandemic and people's ability to kind of do extracurricular activities. And so we recognize that everyone's sort of in the same boat. We do encourage you to still pursue your interests in the context of the pandemic. And so that means, you're volunteering, whether it has to go to an online format, or all your hobbies that you still do, your sports that you still do, still hopefully being able to be involved in some capacity, and just really describing how things had to be changed and accommodated. And there's lots of activities that you can include and do that aren't required for you to be, for example, in a group or in an organized setting or one-to-one with others. And so we would just really encourage you to continue being involved in those activities that do interest you.
Another great question here from Katrina is just effectively speaking to the potential applications of engineering education that has been found useful as a medical student. Can you speak to that a little bit, how engineering acumen translates into the medical education program?
Yeah, and I think it really comes back to the diversity of medicine, right? There are incredibly technology intense aspects of medicine now. And I think that's where the engineering very much lends itself to. And that's anywhere from radiology and the advancing areas of different procedures being done under radiology. There's also lots of work being done around sort of modeling and algorithms for public health, also for modeling of diseases. And so I think there are lots and lots of niche areas where you can very much use your engineering background. And I think what we're seeing more and more is the evolving face of medicine, right? It's now more and more interacting with technology, virtual appointments, all sorts of electronic charting and algorithms to help physicians provide the best care. And a lot of this is technology based. And so I think there's lots and lots of opportunity.
Fantastic. Another interesting question from Nikolai, this will probably be the last one here, is he said that he's heard that there are some programs in other universities offering an MBA/MBA joint degree, or MD/MBA joint degree. In the future, is there going to be a pathway for that at UBC? Do you see that in the future of the program?
Possibly. I think it'll I think there is a desire to kind of have some of these combined programs, but it will require a little bit of sort of development and commitment from both schools, so both the School of Business and the School of Medicine. It's not going to be happening in the next year or 2 years. This would be a several years sort of process, but particularly if there's demand for it from applicants, then I think that is probably the best motivation and to kind of get the momentum going to kind of look at those programs.
All right. Well, can't thank you enough for being here, Dr. Shazad. Much appreciated. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you to Rohit as well, who is now long gone. But so everybody, please feel free, fill out the Qualtrics survey and make sure you give us feedback on these sessions. It helps everybody. And once again, thank you everybody for attending, and thank you for your time, Dr. Shazad.
Great. All the best. Thank you for the invite, and good luck, everyone.